3 weeks after deploying AI, most companies think they've figured it out. The system works. The numbers look good. The team is impressed. It feels like progress. But that's not the real timeline. That's just the beginning. Because what actually happens next, almost no one tracks. And it's where most AI projects quietly go wrong. A few months ago, a company I worked with rolled out AI into one of their core processes. It replaced a chunk of manual work. What used to take hours now took minutes. The first phase was exactly what you'd expect. Everything improved. Faster turnaround, lower cost, fewer visible issues. So leadership did what most companies do. They marked it as a success. That's phase 1, the success phase. And it's misleading, because phase 2 starts right after that, and almost nobody notices it. People begin adjusting, not because something broke, because something feels slightly off. They fix inputs before sending them in. They double-check certain outputs. They handle edge cases manually. Small things, nothing that triggers a report, nothing that shows up in your metrics, but enough to change how the process actually works. Have you seen this? Where the system technically works, but the team using it starts doing extra work around it? That's phase 2, the adaptation phase. And this is where the timeline starts to split, because now there are 2 versions of the system, the one leadership sees and the one the team experiences. At this point, everything still looks fine, so nobody intervenes. And that leads to phase 3, the drift phase. This is where things get harder to see, because now those small adjustments have become habits. The extra checks are no longer temporary. They're part of the process, but they're undocumented, untracked, invisible. So, your metrics still say efficiency improved, but the reality is efficiency is being rebuilt manually, quietly. That's where most companies start feeling friction, not in the system, in the work. Things feel slower again, heavier, less predictable. But nobody can point to a clear cause because nothing is obviously broken. That's the trap. And then phase 4 starts. This is usually around month 4, 5, 6, the questioning phase. Leadership starts asking, why aren't we seeing more improvement? Or, why does this feel harder than before? And the answers are unclear, because the real process has never been fully mapped. The team adapted, but those adaptations never made it back into the system. So now, you're making decisions based on a version of reality that no longer exists. That's where confidence starts to drop. Not dramatically, just enough. People trust the system a little less. They rely on it a little less. They check more, and that leads to phase 5, the compensation phase. This is where the AI is still running, but the efficiency is gone, because humans are now compensating for it, constantly, checking outputs, fixing inconsistencies, making judgment calls, and none of that is visible in your dashboards. From the outside, it still looks like a functioning system, but inside, it's heavier than before. That's the moment most companies misdiagnose the problem. They say, the AI didn't deliver, but that's not what happened. The system followed the timeline. Exactly. This is an AI clone, by the way, on purpose, because this is exactly how we use AI inside our own work. I run Data Wonder. We build AI systems for companies that want to automate real operational processes and make sure those systems actually hold up over time. Insurance, accounting, healthcare, and this timeline shows up almost every time, not because the technology fails, but because the organization doesn't track what happens after deployment. Here's the part nobody talks about. Deployment is not the hard part. Alignment over time is. Because every phase introduces change, people adapt, processes shift, edge cases appear, assumptions break. And if nobody is responsible for tracking that, the system drifts quietly until the gap becomes visible. And by then, you're not optimizing anymore. you're fixing. That's why most AI projects feel successful early on and disappointing later. Not because they stopped working, but because nobody was watching the full timeline. So what actually changes this? Not better tools, not better models. You need to manage the timeline itself. You need to track when people start adapting, where extra work appears, where trust begins to drop. Because those signals tell you which phase you're in. And if you catch it early, you can correct it before drift becomes structural. Because once you're in the compensation phase, you're no longer scaling efficiency. You're maintaining it. And that's a very different problem. I'm curious where your company is in this timeline. Still in the success phase? Or already seeing signs of adaptation? Maybe even drift? And if you're somewhere in that transition, that's exactly the kind of problem we work on. You can book an introduction call using the link below.